Thank you very much, Jamie. So I'm happy to have this chance to share a story that illustrates why the eighth principle is important to me. It's a very personal story that happened in a very public forum at this church, and some of you may remember it. So a couple of years ago, I chaired the Strategic Planning Task Force, and its members were Ashley Daniels, Pierre Giroux, Irene Laurie, Beverly Horton, Gail Rappolt, and Julie Bergshoff. And last year on Zoom, we held a consultation on a draft plan, and I was the facilitator for that meeting. The last part of the meeting saw each of the small working groups reporting back on their discussions, as they do. So one of the groups had a discussion about hiring practices, and concerns were raised about whether applying a diversity lens to our hiring practices would lead to the hiring of unqualified people. We've all heard this exclusionary and frankly racist argument many times, and many of us have come to understand it to be exactly that. But some of us are still working through our understanding of how racist stereotypes inform our thinking and how harmful and hurtful this can be to the people being stereotyped. The group that had this conversation did not call it out as racist and hurtful. And the facilitator of that group reported it back to the large group. As the meeting facilitator, I had the opportunity to call the comment out, but instead I did what good white people have been doing for centuries. I ignored it. I knew it was racist and offensive, but in the moment, I took the path of least resistance and simply moved on. I consider myself to be a good facilitator, but a good facilitator would have found a way to call out the comment clearly and positively, creating a teachable moment out of a difficult one. If we had had the eighth principle in place and had been working on its implementation, I would have been less likely to miss this important opportunity to contribute to the dismantling of racism, and more likely to have had the skills and confidence to facilitate the situation skillfully. I consider myself to be a good person, but turning a blind eye to discrimination isn't consistent with that. We've all done it many times, but the eighth principle makes it clear that we have to stop doing it, and it will hold us accountable in a way that hasn't been the case before. I also consider myself to be a good friend, but in that moment, I showed my friend Beverly and anyone else who was personally impacted by this racist statement that I could not be counted on to support them. This was the hardest part of the whole thing for me. At the end of the day, racism is personal, and dismantling racism means putting the needs of our racialized friends ahead of our own needs to avoid conflict or difficult conversations. The eighth principle, with its focus on dismantling racism as a spiritual practice and not just a social justice issue, will help us all to be better friends and allies. So I will be voting for the eighth principle next week, having learned firsthand that I am quite capable of contributing to the perpetuation of racism and hurting people I care about in the process. I need to be supported, challenged, forgiven, and held accountable in my anti-racist journey. And you are the people who are best positioned to do that for me and with me. Thank you.